I saw Curry Barker's feature-length directorial debut Obsession on Friday, and I recorded a spoiler-free review for it right afterwards. I only really do that when a movie feels urgent to me, when I want to grab people by the shoulders and say you should probably check this out for yourself. Now it's Sunday, and I have had 2 full days to sit with what I think this film has stirred up in me. It's been long enough for me to get past the immediate shocks of the film and start understanding what's really going on in the story beyond all the blood and the bedlam. I think beneath the surface level plot and the scares and the gore and the wildly uncomfortable laughs, there is something unexpectedly tender at work here. This is a film that has something genuinely considerate to say about the pull of wanting somebody and relationships that damage us and the painfully false mythology of the concept of soulmates. In the last 2 days, I have watched every Curry Barker interview I can get my hands on, and that's allowed a lot of his nearly transparent symbolism to come into clearer focus for me. Symbolism like Nicky's Hansel and Gretel story, or the actual mechanics of the One Wish Willow itself. So I want to walk you through this story and its various themes as I've interpreted them, and I'm going to be speaking about the ending in some detail, so consider yourselves warned. For a lot of casual viewers, this movie is going to play as a funny, scary, shocking tale of codependence and romantic horror, and that is a perfectly valid interpretation. But after listening to Curry talk about making the movie, I think there's a much deeper, emotionally poignant message running beneath the film. Curry said he's been toying with this idea of obsession for a while. He keeps all of his notes in his phone where all of his story ideas live, and originally this movie was meant to be about 2 people who are obsessed with each other and how potentially crazy that could get. Based on that and everything else I've heard him say, I see this film as an exploration of obsession within relationships, whether it's coming from one partner or both. It's asking where the line is between healthy love and something that isn't healthy at all, and it's examining some of the behaviors we try to justify in the name of what we think is love. And here's something rather surprising. Curry got the idea for this deeply unsettling movie from an episode of The Simpsons. If you've seen the episode where Homer buys the monkey's paw, you'll know the trope. Homer gets his wishes granted, but every wish arrives with disastrous consequences attached. Obsession adapts that classic monkey paw structure, and this is where the genius in Curry's writing really starts to seep through. He's crafted a story about obsession that works on 2 levels simultaneously. On one level, there's the supernatural. There is a curse with rules and consequences. And on the other level, it's achingly real. And he has woven these 2 threads together in a way that makes them play off of each other perfectly, which is genuinely remarkable for a 26-year-old guy. And Curry himself put it beautifully. It's just way better to pose a question at the end and have a movie strike conversations. You can market this movie as a gory slasher possession film, but then you can trick the audience into coming in to see a more psychological, thought-provoking movie. So let's take a look at how Curry sewed all that thought-provoking symbolism into his story. The film begins with Bear, played by Michael Johnston, who has been relegated to what some people would call friend zone hell by his co-worker Nicky, played by Indy Navarrete. He starts out talking about the recent death of his grandmother and how much Nicky was there to help him through it. He's physically attracted to her, of course, but he also appreciates her generosity and her selflessness, and all those little quirks and mannerisms we all notice about somebody when an attraction is starting to form. And there's an innocent sweetness to it. At least initially. This is the entry point into Bear's obsession, which is of course the film's non-supernatural strand. On its surface, you could write this off as just another innocent crush, and I suppose in a lot of ways it is. But that's the thing about obsessive patterns. They don't always announce themselves. We don't always reveal all of our innermost thoughts on these subjects, even when we're speaking to our closest friends. And sometimes, we're not even consciously aware of those thoughts ourselves. In its early stages, obsession can feel exactly like falling in love, and that's partly what makes it so difficult to recognize. The other half of this equation is Nicky, who sees Bear as her brother. Later in the story, when Ian jokingly refers to her as Bear's girlfriend, she responds with an instinctive, ew. She even tries to convince him to pursue their mutual friend Sarah. She's being clear and she's being kind in what she's trying to say. But Bear, who is caught in the intense grip of his feelings, doesn't have the capacity to hear her sincere thoughts as the declarations they are meant to be. And this is one of the quiet tragedies of obsessive love. It's an inability to hear no. And instead of counting his losses and looking for somebody else, he continues to drop subtle hints about his feelings. He flirts with her in his car, and he proceeds as though he might eventually crack her seemingly tough exterior if he just says or does the right thing. But every one of his efforts fails, and half the time he can't even articulate what he's trying to say because he's so love-struck. And so, out of desperation and obsession, he decides to crack his one-wish willow, which claims to grant a single wish for anything you want. And he wishes Nikki would love him more than anything in the world. And again, it sounds innocent enough. And as you probably know from the movie's premise, he does get his wish, but as per the monkey paw lore, there are terrible and ironic consequences attached to its fulfillment. And from the moment Nikki comes back to the car, the two types of obsession, the real and the supernatural, become inseparable and inextricably entwined. And it's within that merging that Curry explores his subject matter. The second Bear makes the wish, you could argue Nikki becomes possessed by whatever supernatural force is responsible for granting the wish. This is not some new version of Nikki who suddenly sees Bear under a different light or from a new angle. This is an entirely separate entity. It's almost like something is impersonating a woman in her 20s and it doesn't know quite how to do it. And Curry did this intentionally to unnerve us. This is where his YouTube-honed instincts really start to shine through. He talks about putting the audience in that uncanny valley where you don't know how to feel about someone. He says that's a way more effective emotion than simply telling the audience you should feel scared or angry or happy. When you leave them unsure how they should feel, that's when you get that deep uncomfortability. And despite all the weirdness and the totally abrupt shift in her treatment of Bear, he accepts it as a confirmation she suddenly likes him, and they become a couple. And what follows is a deterioration that escalates beyond anything most of us could have imagined. But the shape of it, or the arc of it, will seem very familiar to anybody who has ever experienced or seen an obsessive relationship. Nikki starts out on unsure footing. She is awkward and artless, the way most of us are when we first start interacting with somebody we have romantic interests in. But when there's an unhealthy, obsessive dynamic, that is only the starting point. As things progress, she becomes dishonest for no apparent reason, starts telling huge lies, like the one about her father having cancer. Obsessive people will often start lying to cover things up or to secure somebody's affections. Then she positions herself at the foot of his bed so she can watch over him while he's sleeping, monitoring and surveillance, and a desperate need to keep eyes on the person you love at all times. This is also very real behavior. It's a physical manifestation of the terror obsessed people feel at the possibility their loved one might just slip away the second they look elsewhere. Then she creates a memorial shrine on the floor of the apartment using Bear's dead cat as the centerpiece. And in real-world practice, obsession sanctifies, it builds altars, it turns objects and symbols of the beloved into relics. Then she seals them inside the apartment by duct taping the front door, which is a complete restriction of movement or an isolation from the outside world. When an obsession deepens, the impulse to control the other person's entire sphere of access can become overwhelming. Then the dead cat ends up in Bear's lunch after Nikki has eaten some of it herself. Obviously, this is horror movie Escalation, but also, at its core, it's about consumption. It is an obsessive urge to take the other person inside of you, to merge so fully with them there are no boundaries left. Then she writes and recites her own rendition of Hansel and Gretel with some very overt incestuous undertones. Now, obviously, this is shocking by itself, but if you remember earlier, Nikki has always thought of Bear as her brother. In her story, Gretel is sexually turned on by Hansel and infatuated with him. And they are brother and sister. It's deeply uncomfortable, and it's meant to be, because when true desperation sets in for the obsessive person, their capacity to recognize even the most fundamental boundaries can completely dissolve. All their friends can see there was clearly something wrong with Nikki, and Bear can see it too, but he keeps trying to make it work because he's obsessed with her. He wants things to work so badly he tries to force it, and that's despite all of the very clear signals that everything is going terribly wrong. Now, all of these behaviors have been cranked up for full horror movie effect. But when you think about real-life people in toxic relationships with one or both partners trapped in obsessive patterns, these dynamics are actually recognizable. People try and make it work with partners whose behavior is completely unacceptable all the time. As human beings who want nothing more than to be loved, when we lack confidence in ourselves or we can't appreciate our own worth, we feel we have to make these concessions and these accommodations or else we might end up alone. And that is a genuinely horrifying and heartbreaking headspace to be stuck in. And here is how Curry has shown both types of obsessive behaviors in this film. Bear's natural obsession and Nikki's supernaturally imposed one mirrors real-world obsessive patterns so closely the boundary between them becomes practically meaningless. Curry also uses the supporting cast to show not only how obsession affects both main characters, but also how it's interpreted by the people around them. And this is where I think the film gets particularly sophisticated. Bear's best friend Ian sees these new developments as Bear taking advantage of Nikki, but Sarah thinks it looks more like Nikki is taking advantage of Bear. Ian thinks Nikki is leaning on Bear for emotional support and that she should probably see a therapist instead, whereas Sarah thinks Nikki is exploiting a vulnerable person and using his need for emotional support to her advantage. They're both looking at the same relationship and seeing the exact opposite thing. Obsessive behavior, like any other form of emotional or cognitive dysregulation, is a complex, intricate set of processes. It's usually from an accumulation of contributing factors starting in early childhood, carrying right through into mature adult relationships. It never arrives with a clear label, it's messy, and it's very hard to read from the outside. And the fact that these two best friends, both of whom care deeply, have literally opposite opinions as to what's going on speaks to that complexity. If obsession was a simple black and white issue, naturally Ian and Sarah would have been in agreement. And this is where Curry adds another layer. Sarah has a thing for Bear, and Ian has slept with Nikki. Everyone in this story is carrying something hidden, and Curry hasn't included these details for no reason. He's suggesting that in this story, and by extension in life in general, there are no perfect people and there is no single correct perspective. We're all coming at things from our own tangled histories. We need to be aware of that when we are considering passing judgment on others. Up until now, we've been operating under the assumption that Nikki is entirely under the spell of an external curse, that a force outside her has taken control and is puppeteering her actions. But as I mentioned in my spoiler-free review, there are moments in the film where Nikki has flashes of clarity. It's like she's snapping out of it for a minute. When she and Bear have her first kiss, she pulls back. Something within her resists. When she's sleeping, she talks in her sleep, and what she says suggests the cursed version of her is dormant, and the real version of her is awake, and she asks Bear to kill her. These are devastating moments because it suggests Nikki is still in there somewhere and she's aware of what's happening to her. She's horrified by it, but she's unable to regain control. And this is what prompts Bear to call the company that makes the One Wish Willow. The customer service agent tells him if he wants to end the curse, he has 3 options: kill himself, have somebody else make the exact opposite wish, or stay with Nikki forever. And then the agent puts the real Nikki on the phone, and she's hysterical and screaming, and the implication is the company has somehow taken her spirit hostage. And there is something deeply resonant and unsettling in this concept, if you think about it. People who wrestle with obsessive behaviors, whether it's within a relationship or otherwise, often describe a very similar feeling. It's as if they're taken away somewhere else and held there. And every so often they find themselves brought back to a place of balance and awareness, and they realize they have not been themselves until the curse of obsession pulls them right back under. For people with obsessive issues, these moments of clarity can be absolutely terrifying because you can see everything that's happening, but you can't stop it. And in a second act of desperation, Bear tries to make a second wish, but he can't because it says right on the box you can only have one. So he goes to Ian's house and tries to explain what's going on, but Ian doesn't believe him and he ends up making a sarcastic wish for $1 billion, and he gets it. And then Nikki kills Ian and Sarah, and when things look like they are truly completely over, Bear locks himself in his grandmother's bathroom and tries to overdose on some of her medication. He changes his mind at the last minute and tries expelling the pills into the toilet. And right as he's about to do it, he slips into this state of ecstasy. And for the first time in the movie, it appears he and Nikki are in a happy, loving, balanced relationship. For a minute. But then Bear collapses and succumbs to the overdose. In the next shot, the camera pans down to a cracked willow wish on the coffee table, perhaps implying that Nikki made a wish that Bear would reciprocate her feelings. But Bear's death lifts the curse from Nikki, leaving her standing in the aftermath of the death of almost everybody she knows, and all of it at her own hands. That final image of Nikki standing alone in the wreckage of all of her loved ones, suddenly lucid and fully aware of everything that's happened, I think it's the film's most important statement. When you try to build a relationship on anything other than real, true, mutual love, things are always going to end in pain. Obsession is not love, no matter how intensely it can feel like love in the moment. And the real damage obsession leaves behind doesn't just hurt the obsessed person or the person they're fixated on. It radiates out and touches everybody. But here's what I find genuinely moving about this film and what I think Curry really got right. The film never treats obsession like a monstrosity, even when it's showing monstrous behavior. It seems to understand at the root of obsessive love, there's almost always a deep and unaddressed wound somewhere. It might be the fear of abandonment or the belief you are not enough as you are. And it manifests as a desperate, aching hope that if you just hold on tight enough for long enough, maybe you won't have to face all that hope and doubt by yourself ever again. It's not an evil person. It's just a person in pain. If you recognize yourself in any part of this movie, if you've felt that pull, that desperate grasping, the inability to just let someone or something go, you have to understand there is no shame in it. These types of patterns come from somewhere. They are survival strategies that have far outlived their usefulness. They could be understood and they could be healed. Obsession is a horror movie, of course, but it's also a remarkably compassionate piece of work disguised as a gory slasher possession film. And maybe if you're open to it and you allow it to happen, this film might instigate a conversation you've been needing to have with a loved one. Or maybe even yourself. Until next time, folks.